Hello and welcome to the latest edition of our GRC and Cybersecurity Leaders podcast. In today's episode, hi Tom, can you first introduce yourself to the listeners and tell them a little bit about what your company does?
Sure. My name is Tom Cornelius. I'm the co-founder and one of the contributors for the Secure Controls Framework. The SCF is an initiative that is open source where we provide cybersecurity and privacy controls at no cost via the Creative Commons licensing so that companies can have a Rosetta Stone approach to controls so that IT, cyber, privacy, and other teams can all speak the same language of controls, both within their company and also intercompany. So what one control means to one company can mean the same thing to multiple different companies.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So before we get further into, the interview a bit about yourself, it's always interesting to hear what you do outside of work. So you can tell your listeners a little bit of what you're into outside of work.
Sure. It's kind of nice to unplug from the cyber world. I just go old school and I do bladesmithing and blacksmithing. So making either metal artwork or knives or axes, those type of things. It's really a lot of fun.
Fantastic. Okay. So as you said before, can you tell us a little about what your role is now? An overview of how you got into your current role and any other companies you've worked for that our listeners may find interesting.
Sure. So I've been doing documentation really since about 2005, and it started out as really a side hustle, where up until you get into the early 2010s, when you start having Sony, TJ Maxx, Home Depot, the different incidents that happened there, a lot of organizations really honestly didn't care that much about documentation or the whole governance, risk, and compliance GRC side of things as a whole. When that started changing, what I found is companies started, taking the interest to invest in documentation, policy, standards, procedures, just conceptual, like how do we actually do things like vulnerability management, risk management, so on and so forth. One thing we noticed in about the 2016 timeframe is when GDPR was on the horizon. That's when we had companies that were coming to us and saying, "Hey, we can't just do ISO, we can't just do NIST. What do you have that can essentially be a multi-framework approach?" So what we ended up doing was we developed a product, the digital security program, that was very well received. But then we had the same customers coming back to us saying, "Hey, this is great, but what do I do with the rest of my environment that is unmanaged? We have an island of PCI, island of SOX, say island of HIPAA, but the rest of the environment's completely unmanaged." So that's when I got with a bunch of peers in the industry, and we developed the Secure Controls Framework as its own open source project. And that was launched in 2018, where it started off mapping to a few dozen different laws, regulations, and frameworks. And now it's up over, I believe, over 110 laws, regulations, and frameworks, on a global scale. And so I'm kind of an architect and contributor on that, just kind of herding cats with different initiatives that we have. We've done a couple side projects where we have the security and privacy capability maturity model, the security and privacy risk management model. We've done a privacy management principles, because one of the interesting things we found was that, say 9 out of 10 times on different calls, you would find that a company, they would know what they would want to align with, NIST CSF, ISO, or NIST 853, type things. But when you asked what type of privacy framework they wanted to align with, usually it was the inverse, so maybe 1 out of 10. And even out of that, most of those companies were saying, "Oh, well, we're just going to do the SOC 2 privacy principles." So when you look at from a CCPA perspective or GDPR perspective, that's really not sufficient. So we created again, almost another Rosetta Stone approach that allows a company to look at the top dozen or so different privacy frameworks and normalize those into a way that they could address ISO, OMB, GDPR, CCPA, that also are tied back to the SCF. So you get this this really kind of elegant solution of cybersecurity and privacy controls all linking together to make something that's, that's viable. And that's the end of the day. We want something that works. Having something that is pretty but doesn't work doesn't help anyone.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. We use it natively in our platform. I know we work together on this, but like I say, it's a really, I mean, I can't believe I didn't know about it before. It's like one of the best kept secrets out there. It's like the amount of time for years of like spending as a consultant, like bringing these frameworks together, doing this on engagement after engagement. And there were paid things you could do to do it. But I mean, like knowing it was completely free is, like I say, it's been changed. It's been very much changed our customers and impacted them. But like I say, I think it just needs to be out there. More people need to know more about this framework because it's brilliant. It's not perfect, but it's a really great start for 10.
Kurt, and you bring up a good point. It's not perfect. And one of the things is like, so we don't create our own stuff. There's a lot of things, like if you look at, what are things that can be done for ransomware? We just don't make up stuff just out of thin air. We wait for a law or regulation or framework to say, this is the proper way that you address that, just so it's defendable based on, quote unquote best practices. And that's where, we try and do about a quarterly update because new things come out from NIST, quite often, such as like, cybersecurity, supply chain risk management with NIST 800-161 Rev 1. That's going to be huge. We're going to release a new update that's going to have that information at this quarter. But we just continue to evolve it and try and make it better. Because as things come out, such as PCI version 4 or cybersecurity SCRM, that gives us a way to also refine some of the controls as well to make them, just to keep making them better. And one of the things we do is say, unlike PCI, where they renumber stuff all the time, if something is going to be deprecated, we just literally kill it off like NIST does. And we'll basically say that this is deprecated and rolled into another control. So it makes it easy that if you're going to use the SCF, you don't have to worry about the next version renumbering or making something new. So what we've kind of found over the last over 4 years now, the same 32 domains are still applicable. Because we get people that ask us quite often is like, well, what about blockchain or stuff like that? You don't technically need another domain for blockchain. When you actually dissect blockchain into what it is, key management, cryptography, everything along those lines, that already exists from a control level. So it's withstood a lot of public debate. And, again, but we're always looking for ways to improve it. So we're always getting feedback from people from around the world. It's really pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, like I say, it is amazing. I know you've talked a lot about kind of SCF and some of the way, obviously, you do with Compliance Forge, but obviously you are a security professional. Like, where did you learn your trade? How did you get into this space?
Well, I was always a geek. So it was kind of funny where I graduated from the United States Military Academy at West Point, and I went aviation. So I had a minor in computer science there, but I was always the geek in the unit when it came to either setting up the first networks in the late 90s or doing other things along those lines. So when the opportunity came out to be an information system security officer, no one else wanted to touch that with a 10-foot pole, but I was like, hey, that sounds cool, I'll do that, which was really kind of neat. But then I got sent to basically hacking boot camp, from the Army. And that really turned it on to, this is super cool. And actually, it was kind of the reverse Top Gun. I went from being a pilot to a geek, where it was just like, I happily, walked away from the aviation side and went into the cybersecurity side because I thought it was just, really intellectually challenging and, it was a lot of fun. But I did defense contract work. I worked for large Fortune 500s. And then I just found that there's a need for documentation. Essentially, it's a niche within a niche. And that's where Compliance Forge really exists. We've got Fortune 100 clients, foreign governments, all the way down to small mom and pops. And, so that works, hand in hand with the secure controls framework with some of the development work, different initiatives for education and training. Big things. One of the cool things we're working on right now, and it's been over a year because it's kind of like doing a Texas two-step, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, based on different ways to do it. But it's creating assessment objectives for every SCF control, where similar to NIST 853 alpha or 171 alpha or 172 alpha, where you have specific criteria. What we've been working on is making that assessment objectives for every SCF control so that third-party auditors can use the SCF as a way to perform conformity assessments. And later this year, we're hoping to actually finalize and launch the SCF conformity assessment program, the SCF CAP. And that's going to be really pretty cool because companies will be able to do first-party declarations as well as third-party audits to be able to show off of this meta framework as they're picking. The concept is defining what right looks like. So if you have certain laws, regulations, and frameworks you have to comply with, those define your must-haves, your minimum compliance criteria. But then your average, CISO or security team is going to say, well, that's really cool, but compliance doesn't make us secure. So there's going to be other things, these are discretionary security requirements or DSR that could be a FIM, it could be DLP, it could be you name the different type of technology or other control, but the type of stuff that adds security onto compliance. So you add this minimum compliance criteria with discretionary security requirements, and that really establishes your baseline, of what right looks like for your organization. And that, we're calling it the minimum security requirements, the MSR. That MSR is going to be like a snowflake where it's unique to every company. And that's where the SCF conformity assessment program will be able to use these assessment objectives to perform an assessment based off of, off of those specific controls. And the idea is, to come up with a determination on risk, does the evidence conform, or is there a significant deficiency, or is it even there a material weakness in the overall security and privacy program? So from a CISO's perspective, this can be immensely valuable for telling that story to management of like, hey, you think it's really good, but this is broken for these different reasons. Or at the same time, it can validate the good hard work that a security team has performed.
Fantastic. So I know we've spoke about kind of your role, and we don't really spoke about kind of the size of company. You kind of loosely mentioned, but like, how big is Compliance Forge? I guess also how big is the secure control framework? How many contributors have you got around the world? And really, like, what are the organizations you work with? I know you said there's a wide spectrum, but is there some kind of common organization that you see a lot who engage with you?
Yeah. So Compliance Forge itself, small company, privately held. The SCF is made up of a few dozen different contributors, mainly US based, some overseas, where the client base is kind of shared between the two. Again, we've got from micro smalls on some of our products to Fortune 100s and major military commands, foreign governments, that type of stuff. Really, for the SCF though, where we've kind of found is it's generally medium to enterprise environments to use the SCF, purely because when you have your smaller companies, maybe you might find an IT guy. You get above 50 or 100 people, maybe there's a single hat security person. So usually that's kind of more, they're in the realm of putting out fires versus really trying to get a handle on proactive management. And the SCF is really focused on proactive management, because if all you're doing is just worried about, I just have to show what I'm doing for CMMC or just doing what for PCI, use an Excel spreadsheet, make your life easy and just do that. But when you're juggling multiple different laws, regulations, and frameworks, like you've got to do ISO 27001, you're doing CMMC, you're doing GDPR, CCPA, that then becomes a nightmare. And that's where the SCF can really help identify normalize those type of controls It can also help prioritize, what's really important, what's not important. It can give maturity level criteria to help define what right looks like, both from a budgeting perspective. So if, guidance to a CISO is, we want this to be standardized across the enterprise. The SCF controls can help, provide at least a little bit of guidance of what that might look like from a people, processes, and tools perspective, as well as project managers. So if they're given, these requirements, they can kind of see, okay, this is what I've got to have to be able to pass, this control. So it's helping give the answers to the test early on to project managers. So you throw kind of everything together, and that's really where it's more of an enterprise down to medium companies. And one thing that we're finding is a lot of times, you've got security people that are job hopping every say 1 to 3 years. So we're getting companies that are on their second, third iteration of one person's used it, they're taken to another company, and so it's really got we don't spend a single penny on advertising. It's all grassroots, it's all word of mouth, which really helps to go show that it works. I mean, if it didn't work, we wouldn't have that many companies out there using it, as well as GRC solutions like yours that are embedding it within their tooling.
Yeah, I mean, like for us, it's a huge differentiator to have access to such a comprehensive control library that covers so many of, I guess, the universal requirements that everyone wants to do. Plus, for our US and UK customers, I mean, the things they have to do as well. Like, I mean, it is fairly comprehensive. And like I say, like you said, the maturity guidance, I think you've undersold that there of like somebody giving you that level of maturity guidance on a control by control basis. You pay a consulting firm a lot of money to do that normally.
Oh yeah. Well, and there's the kind of the moments too that some companies have that kind of holy crap moment. Like, I've got to do all of this. It's like, well, yeah, but don't blame us. That's what you signed your contracts for. You said you're going to do NIST 853 moderate, or you're going to do this and this and this. One of the things that I take a little bit of like a personal pleasure in is that enlightenment moment when people kind of realize, I can't just say these are the top 50 controls we're going to do, because right there you're able to say these are your must-haves. So you have 230 must-have requirements. You can't lie to the board, you can't lie to other people and say no. Those we can kind of ignore. These are the ones that actually matter. And that's where on some of the educational material we kind of bring up, and it really does help a lot of the CISOs that we work with, of saying, hey, it's okay to have let's say you've got a couple hundred requirements and you can't just do it this year. This is where you got to put the big boy pants on or big girl pants on and be able to say, look, we're going to come up with a multi-year roadmap. We're going to do these 50 controls this year, these controls next year, and these controls next year, to be able to have a prioritized, basically a risk prioritized approach to be able to get to what the company is obligated to do. But at the same time, it's being able to honestly look at someone and say, look, we're not negligent. We understand these are this is what we can do. This is what we can't do. Here are the compensating controls we're putting in place. And we are managing it based off of the priority of the risk that we have. And that's where, tools such as yours are great, because you can help manage those tools, or manage those controls, tell the story, and, show how risk is actually being managed. And that's something that really you can't do very well off of Excel. Like if you're just doing PCI off of Excel or CMMC off of Excel, it's hard to really kind of tell more of a holistic picture, because one company or one team may say, well, we only have to worry about these 50. And these other ones are saying, well, we've got 110. Instead of more of a ringleader saying, okay, look, we have to do all of this across the company. Yes, there's a couple high controls we've got to do in these security enclaves, but it's managing it what makes sense to minimize risk across the organization. And that's what I think is cool. That's what I like doing.
Yeah, I mean, it is fantastic. I know we spoke before. You're always saying the challenges are we're helping smart people really tackle and untangle compliance and security requirements. So, what would you say if you're a CISO or someone right now? You've got you're trying to address this, you've got many compliance requirements. What are the steps to get going? How would you start to tackle this problem?
First, I say make a pot of coffee. And instead of just trying to answer this off of, we actually wrote the integrated controls framework, integrated controls model, the ICM. And that's available off of either Compliance Forge or the SCF. And it's 8 different steps to go from, essentially, how do you actually do GRC? And, maybe after this video, you can include the link to it. But it's a thoughtful approach of, how do you establish context, again, identify your must-haves and nice-to-haves, assign ownership, have the documentation that supports it, then be able to essentially, manage how the controls are being implemented. And then at the end, that's when you start getting into risk management and metrics, and, it's the plan, do, check, act approach. And that's how we've actually overlaid, that with these 8 different principles. So it constantly is working on improving itself. So we'll include that link for your viewers.
Yeah, we'll add that in. And the other thing is, where do people get it wrong? So we're talking about lots of people taking these steps, getting it right. Where do you see people get it wrong, and what can they be doing to kind of get better?
Sure. It's assumptions. Assumptions are where people get things wrong. And the reason for that is it's going from the firefighter mentality of, I've just got to do this. And they start going down one path, say, just to do CMMC. And they completely forget that they've got PCI, they've got HIPAA, they've got, privacy requirements. And so they spend all their time going down one path. And then when they realize they've got more to do, they've got to re-architect it, redo work, maybe redo technology, different segmentation. So if they took a step back, made that pot of coffee, and just, went around and talked to people, again, you do it on Zoom or in person, depending on your environment, but go talk to legal, go talk to procurement, go talk to facilities, and ask those questions of so what contracts do we have? Do we have any contracts that have privacy requirements or cybersecurity requirements, or other obligations that have cybersecurity and privacy implications? And it's coming up with that list that really define the must-haves. And if you don't have that defined list of must-haves, you're going to go down the wrong path. And the discretionary stuff is, again, it's discretionary. You can kind of say, I would like to have this. If not, maybe it's not going to hurt stuff. But you're able to kind of, pass those decisions, up, to the, pass the buck up, the food chain, let them accept the risk if they don't want to fund it. But if you go down the wrong path, that's with poor assumptions, that's where smart people tend to kind of, wind up in troubles. And then they just update the resume and jump to another company and leave the mess for someone else.
We've seen it so many times where companies focus on one requirement, go so deep on it, and design the framework entirely on that. And then oh, but we have to do, like you say, PCI, then we have to do NIST, CMMC.
Yep.
And then they end up having to do separate compliance programs
But this is a problem. It's some of it's being a bad CISO. Some of it is just bad management of the CISO. It could be the CIO, it could be the COO, whoever the CISO is reporting to. But it really kind of comes down to if that CISO doesn't have a business plan, that kind of shows that CISO really doesn't deserve that title. They're just, they've got a laundry list of stuff they want to buy, but they're actually not working towards a plan. I've seen it where you've got, CISOs that, have a lot of money, they got to spend it. They buy a bunch of really cool stuff. They make friends with a lot of vendors, and, then as soon as they're out of money or they've got enough on the resume that say, look at all this cool technology I've built and implemented, then they jump ship and leave the actual, implementation and maintenance of it to their lackey. And that doesn't really do anyone any good other than the vendors who are selling the technology. So,
Yeah, look, you do see it all the time. It's like people focus on really cool tech, but they haven't got like the basic governance practices, change management. There's so many like fundamentals which technology doesn't influence that you need to do. And everyone's like, yeah, I need to do all these monitoring controls. Yes, you do. But at the same time, like the fundamentals of your change management procedures and all of your basic governance controls, if they're not in place, tackling stuff down here is kind of you're dealing with very, very low level problems rather than the overarching issues.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point there with defining the issues. Where I really don't care too much for for the state of cyber education, awareness, and pretty picture campaigns and that type of stuff. It's a multi-billion-dollar year industry, but really what matters, and I don't think a lot of companies are doing it, is taking the time to say, okay, this is what we have to do, because it's very bespoke to the organization, and then educating those engineers, those managers, directors, and saying specifically, this is how you fit into this puzzle, and I want this is my strategy. I need you to create your own objectives to implement that strategy. And that becomes a little bit of a problem, where if you're a weak manager and you really don't want to force people to have to make decisions, you're going to reap what you sow. And so it really comes down to really good, solid leadership fundamentals of have a plan, govern it, hold people to the line. And if you've got someone who is long in the tooth, they're in that job, but they're not producing results, or they're afraid to make decisions, move them out, find someone who's actually gonna do it. I've seen that in organizations where it's just people are in positions too long, and it doesn't help the organization.
Thanks. I guess so. I've got another question I'd like to talk to you about. It's kind of, so what are the big ticket items that you're working on? I know we discussed some of these a couple of days ago. What are like the big ticket items that the SCF and the Compliance Forge are working on in the next few months?
Yeah, the big thing, one of the biggest drivers that we see, that's really going to impact, basically the global supply chain, is going to be cybersecurity, supply chain risk management. And this is going to be driven primarily off of NIST 800-161 Rev 1 that just came out. Because if you go back to President Biden a year ago with his executive orders for SBOMs and supply chain security, all of that type of stuff is just now starting to bubble up. We're getting calls on about a weekly basis of like, hey, what do you have for 161? Because it's starting to now show up in contracts. So having the ability to evaluate yourself and then also your supply chain is really where we see the next decade going. And that's where the SCF conformity assessment program is going to be huge on that. We're working with a couple different basically tool makers to help find ways to make it easy to perform assessments. But it's really one of those things where SCRM is gonna touch everyone. So even if you don't feel that you're a U.S. government contractor or defense contractor, it's flowing down to to subcontractors. And again, that's the entire concept: supply chain risk management. So it could be first, second, third, fourth, fifth, all the way down. Companies have to be able to demonstrate how they're implementing security and privacy by design, and supporting contractual obligations. So it's going to hit companies probably in the next 5 years or so. So we're really getting ahead of the wave, just so we have tested, really good, solid solutions that will meet those needs.
And one of the other things we spoke about the other day was materiality and risk. And you said you've been doing some work on this. It'd be really interesting for our listeners to hear kind of what you've been doing on this side.
Sure, and that's all part of the SCF conformity assessment program to help identify, if you kind of look at your traditional, low, medium, high risk, or give me a financial value. That's hard to use when you actually look at a report. When you look at the people who are going to be looking to report, they really kind of want to know, are you meeting some level of risk tolerance? Essentially, does it conform? And so part of that goes to what level of conformity does a company have? Do they have very, very low risk tolerance, such as a defense contractor, utilities, any organization in critical infrastructure is going to have a very low risk tolerance. You get to moderate risk tolerance, could be retail space, some hospitals, just your average company would be more moderate. And then you can get into higher risk tolerance, could be non-technical companies, construction, basic retail, those type of things. So that level of risk, low, moderate, high risk tolerance, affects what level of conformity that you're willing to accept to a baseline set of controls. But the next part of that question is that, so if you don't conform, well, what's the answer? And so it's not just conform or not conform. It's there's a significant deficiency. And again, we're piggybacking on terms that are already well used, but that really indicates a systemic weakness within it could be within a specific domain, maybe like asset control, or it could even be down to a mismanagement or poor management, a systemic issue that's breaking your change management program. So that's keeping you from being able to demonstrate conformity. But then when you look at a program that's completely and utterly broken, that's when there's a material weakness, where you could have you will likely not be able to detect or respond to an incident that meets your that meets your risk threshold. And so you're dumb and blind at that point. You don't have a security program if you have a material weakness.
Yeah, and one of the other things that's quite interesting there is this concept of this blanket approach. I mean, you don't have to apply the same level of control everywhere. I mean, obviously you've got your top level controls, your governance controls, etc. But it's when you talk about secure by design, it's okay, well, what's applicable based on the risk or the context of the thing that we're trying to protect? So many time organizations get caught up on blanket approaches and we need to do everything everywhere. And it's just not realistic, is it? You can't just say, actually, we're going to implement these 400 controls everywhere all the time. It's about understanding your organization, what's a priority and what's important, and obviously applying controls to that context.
And that's where, again, the SCRM has some kind of good concepts. Is they've got 3 different tiers, strategic, operational, and technical, from a focus. So when you kind of look at it from access control, if you've got where everyone in the organization has admin rights on their local box, that opens up so many different issues that you essentially don't have security. So that's more of a strategic issue, but it can also be down to a tactical issue too. If you have an application that's specific only to your team, that you're managing, that isn't part of a larger identity and access management solution. So this is where it kind of comes down to control applicability. You're going to have a lot of controls that are going to apply to the organization. Asset management, access control, physical security. You have different controls that are going to be more operational. So at the department level, which could be access reviews, from a manager or director who's actually going to be hey, I've got these 20 people on my team. Do all of them need access to a security enclave that's out there? All the way down to technical, which is really getting into the secure configurations, your technologies that are actually implementing the protections that you need. So it's understanding that cascading level of how everything fits. So if you focus on on the strategic side, get your access control working, you get your asset management. I mean, again, you start looking like zero trust. There's a lot of marketing stuff that's out there of oh, we're going to go zero trust, we're going to do this. And it's okay, well, let's look at that. Do you have good access control? Well, not really. Okay, well, you fail right there. What about asset management? Do you have robust, accurate asset management? Well, no, I don't. Okay, you fail again right there. So there's a lot of different things that are these fundamental building blocks that you can't jump to this really cool high level of technology if your fundamental IT hygiene practices are broken. And this goes back to that idea of identifying, significant deficiencies, which are your systemic problems, or, you essentially have such a broken program that you don't have any type of security at all. And that's where this concept of materiality comes into.
Fantastic. And I guess one of the things that we're always hearing and are always interested to understand, like, what are you seeing as like the biggest area of concern in the market at the moment? What are people coming to you and saying, we need to address this?
Actually, a lot of it is just flat out situational awareness, where you have stuff like SCRM or cybersecurity maturity model certification, or privacy, where it's I didn't know anything about this. We've had this contract for 2 years, and now I'm being told I've got to attest to this. And so you're seeing, at least we're seeing it from companies are after the fact doing their due diligence. So they've already been doing the contract, then they realize they've got to actually do something, and they're jumping through hoops to try and figure out how they're supposed to do it. They didn't budget for it. They're not properly in the mindset, so they feel like they're getting screwed, but really they just didn't do their homework prior to it. And so that's kind of more of it gets into the broader education of at an industry level, like how do you know what you're supposed to be doing based on your industry.
And it's interesting, I see so many people talking about, oh, we can be compliant against these things in 2 weeks. Like the amount of people out there like promising like the world to these people, and it's like, I don't think there's a silver bullet for this. As you said, it's a top-down approach. It's a big shift in what you need to do, and you need buy-in and strategic buy-in in a program to kind of embed and make one of these programs work. Otherwise, it's just, well, they're not going to get anywhere with it.
Yeah, I honestly, I feel a lot of those organizations that are saying, we can do it in 3 days, we can do it in 2 weeks. When you start looking at, highly complex things like CMMC, SOC, 2 type, PrEP or ISO, even GDPR, I really feel that they're being so disingenuous. It's really, on the border of fraud. Either they're so incompetent and their heads are so firmly, up their own behinds that they don't understand the material themselves, or I don't know if it's VC money telling them they're not going to get another dime until they pump up sales. But you look at anyone from a reasonable perspective, and it might take, depending where they're starting, it could take months, it could take years to get to the point where they can legitimately say, yeah, you are compliant with this. You might not even be secure, but you're at least compliant. Everyone wants that silver bullet, like the weight loss pill. It's going to, make them a movie star. It doesn't exist. I mean, even with Compliance Forge products and the SCF, we view it like these are tools that help enable you to move faster, but you still have to actually, do the work. And, we see it all the time where there's people saying like, we can do everything for you in a couple of days or a couple of weeks. And I honestly don't know if they firmly believe that, or if they're just, pathological liars. But from what we've seen from people who have, been involved with those companies, it generally turns out to be, they're being sold a bill of goods. They don't get compliant, or there's some type of caveat of like, we'll do this, you do the rest of it. So we'll do our portion in a couple of days, but you still have to do all the other work. So it's bad marketing. It kind of pisses me off.
Yeah, we see it all the time, and it's just not believable, is it? It's also unfair, like, because I mean, some of these companies might not know, look, naive if they are to that point, but it's like, look, it isn't a overnight change. It's a long-term change to the organization. You really need to spend a lot of time thinking about this. And to you say, like, setting up a solid security compliance program is not an overnight activity. And just even getting the roles, responsibilities, the governance in place just takes weeks, and getting organizations to buy into that, on top of then implementing all of the specific requirements, which again, depending on where you sit in some of those things, is a hell of a lot of things.
Yeah, and the caveat is it theoretically possible? Yes. If you had a couple person organization that you could, completely go to the cloud, cloud native, you could implement a lot of controls really, really, really quickly. But that's not realistic for the average, organization that's been around for a while. They have maybe on-premise or hybrid approaches with a lot of technology debt. Once you throw technology debt into the equation, you're talking compensating controls, you're talking change management, budget cycles. I mean, I've worked for companies that, flat out, it's like, nope, you're not getting any money for another year. Ask for it in a year. Maybe we'll prioritize it. So right there, a lot of companies, you can't get compliant because you simply don't have the budget to implement new technologies or hire people or, say make a code change to a buggy app, to become compliant. So that's where I really look at a lot of those claims as just being just hogwash.
So can you talk me through what you think a good information security or cyber security professional, what attributes you think they should have?
It's a good one. I don't think there's like a perfect model. I think some of the worst ones I've seen have, I'll start off on that side. They're getting into it because of the money. Someone told them it's a good career move. They go get a degree. Maybe they were help desk before, or they have no background whatsoever in technology, and they want to jump right into, now I'm a security person. Those people I find tend to not have the right mindset for it. Not really creative thinking or thinking it from the perspective of, security in general. Some of the best ones I've found have been ex-military. And I don't know if that's just because dysfunctional mindset, it's like, I'm ex-military, so I can make fun of it. But it's a little bit of anti-authoritarian, mindset, but also of how would I break this? And if you look at it from that hacker's perspective of like, I would attack this and break it these different ways, or I understand that, that this one person is going to be a weakness, and this is how that person, either through apathy or ignorance or just, flat out, stupidity, will break this process. And then that way you can implement the controls to prevent those type of issues. So I think someone that comes at security, the profession from that mindset of an attacker, keep it from the attacker mindset. And that's in governance, risk, and compliance. That's an audit. That's in all of these. So the people who are kind of coming out from a technology background or from a opposing force mindset, I think tend to be some of the most effective and best people within cyber right now. Now, kind of caveat on that one too. I'm going to make fun of privacy. So. Hey, you invited me. I'm on.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I'm enjoying it. It's great.
So one of the things I dislike on privacy is that privacy, for the most part, has been adopted by the legal profession. So you're going to a lot of legal, minds, from either lawyers to, anyone within the legal industry trying to make a buck on privacy. And debating stuff ad nauseum. And I think that's one of the biggest issues on privacy is that it's not a topic to be debated and debated and debated just for the sense of listen to yourself speak. What are you actually doing to provide a solution, to fix it? And I don't see a lot of that on the privacy side. There's a lot of security people, who are getting into privacy, and they're kind of looking at more from a pragmatic approach. But yeah, that's where it's interesting. A little bit of a kind of a battle between cybersecurity professionals and privacy professionals for the heart and soul of privacy. And as I joke, you can have cybersecurity without privacy, but you can't have privacy without cybersecurity. And a lot of people in privacy kind of seem to miss that fundamental truth. So if they're trying to build a privacy program and they know absolutely nothing about cybersecurity other than what they've watched on a couple of webinars, they're part of the problem. So,
yeah, I mean, there's lots of very legal requirements, right? When you read them, and then you're like, okay, yeah, but practically, how do I embed this into my organization? What does this practically mean for, in most cases, your IT function, because they're the ones holding the data, and what do we do with it?
Yep.
They're very different worlds, because you read the requirements, and unless you're a lawyer or you understand that world, like, you have to distill it into meaningful things. And I think that's where a lot of people get unstuck with the privacy requirements, because they look at them and go, I kind of think this is right, rather than this is what we really should be doing.
No, it's a good point too. And one thing we found on the privacy side is a lot of it is very procedural. Like, how are you going to actually do a DPIA, or how are you actually going to do data flow mapping? So like a good example is, GRC solutions are great to be able to assign controls. Like, I am going to assign, Joe Smith the responsibility to do an annual, data flow diagram. But most GRC solutions can't actually, they don't have the organic functionality to perform data flow mapping within the tool. So now that person has to go find another tool, do the data flow mapping, then provide that, attestation evidence, through another tool, such as the GRC. So a GRC can provide the overall governance of it, which is fantastic. But that's where there's a little bit of a disconnect. Some people feel that there should be one tool to rule them all. And really there isn't. You're going to find best in class tools to do certain things. And privacy is, there's a couple players and they're all trying to, buy each other out and, make the best tools. And that's kind of where there's a little bit of it's an automation issue at this point on privacy more than it is on policies or standards.
I completely agree. And it is one of those things where you've got so many people who have struggled with it. And in the US, even more so, because you've got lots of state regulations, which for, I guess, some of the companies that we've spoken to, gambling, with now different states, different privacy laws, even with where they gamble, and then they have to apply different laws. It's so complicated, and you can see why so many organizations are struggling with it.
Yeah, you bring up a good aspect on gambling. When you start looking at physical security controls, cameras, facial detection, that takes on a whole new realm that now you start having the lawyers and privacy professionals get into the physical security space and cybersecurity space. So if they start dictating these requirements without understanding how that affects the business, really it's a big turnoff. So this is where it goes back to that again: make the big pot of coffee, understand your must-haves, your nice-to-haves, and come up with that multi-year roadmap approach. Because realistically, you look at the different the different law enforcement agencies out there, for these different privacy laws. Most of them aren't doing a thing. I remember in Oregon back in 2000, I think it was 8 or 9. You had the Oregon Identity Theft Protection Act, came out back in 2009, and I was in this conference up in Portland where several state employees started off their presentation to this room full of lawyers and cybersecurity professionals, and was like, okay, well, we're really not going to actually fine anyone. We're just gonna tell people that it's we'll tell you what you need to fix. And you could hear this couple hundred people just okay, we can tune out now. You just told us you're not going to actually punish us, so we don't care. And from there it never recovered. I don't think, and most people in Oregon don't even know that there's an Identity Theft Protection Act.
It's got to have teeth, hasn't it? Otherwise people are going to just go, okay, well, look, be fine, but we'll accept the fine is just easier than actually trying to comply with it.
Oh, correct. And this is where you start looking at back in, I think it was November, you had the U.S. Department of Justice created some new initiative to help punish for False Claims Act violations. And so that was really interesting, where especially people thought at the time that maybe that's when the U.S. Department of Defense was going to use that as a way to to help enforce CMMC compliance. And there was a case just a couple of weeks ago that they came to a settlement where no big fines, no one's going to jail. And I kind of collective sigh within the defense industrial base of like, okay, cool. No one's going to go to jail. False Claims Act violations are just it's the boogeyman. And yeah, I don't want to see anyone go to jail, but at the same time, collectively, the U.S. government just lost this big stick. There is no carrot. So they had a stick that was a False Claims Act, and they just, dropped it. And, so other than like on something like, contracting, where you may be able to pull a contract, but again, if the contract is important enough, and you're the sole supplier for the military of a certain widget, everyone knows the Department of Defense is going to give a waiver. They're going to be like, yeah, well, do better next time. But it's like, yeah. So it's a bit of a joke. So until they get teeth, there's really, it's not going to improve that much, especially on the privacy side. I mean, a lot of that type of stuff is like, who's really going to be enforcing it? Maybe whistleblowers might give bad publicity, but I just don't see that being that important right now.
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of these accountability regulations. I don't know if you've come across SMCR, like it's one in the UK, but that's one where, like, for financial services, like, they're now, like, senior people and decision makers are liable for their decisions, and they're now being tested that they're fit and proper. Often you see these regulations happen, and then they kind of move out into financially significant other companies. So, I mean, I would probably wager that will start to happen. But again, that's probably more at a corporate governance level. But ultimately, like, you need to have teeth, and people need to be accountable for decisions. And if you're not going to do that, then people are not going to comply, or they'll do the bare minimum.
Correct. And same within the US, where they have the SEC has, draft guidance on, more cybersecurity experience within the board. But yeah, until board members actually have personal liability, where if they make a really bad decision for accepting the risk, and they're hoping that cyber insurance is gonna pick it, things aren't going to change. So that actually brings up an interesting point, though, is that on cyber insurance, and I kind of completely forgot this one, was one, it's a lot harder for companies to get cyber insurance right now because they're hemorrhaging money. The insurance providers, and we have been approached by a big player within the insurance space to help define a cybersecurity control set. Something that if you've ever looked at the a different policy or the questionnaire that cyber insurance providers are asking, it's the Wild West. A lot of
them, they're like, oh, you got FA across everything. Well, no, like, they're very, like, blanket answers. I've seen them and looked at it and gone, I'm not sure this is helping you, or you understand the questions that you should be asking here.
And so it's twofold. I mean, one, if you say no, then if they don't know what you're talking about, maybe you get dropped. But if you do say yes and you can't prove that you've actually done it, then that's a get out of jail free card for they're going to keep on file and say, hey, you lied to us. We're not gonna pay. So this is where we're kind of hoping to help the insurance industry by not just because if you basically just give a yes or no answer, same thing with third party risk, people are going to lie, or they're like, well, I think we're doing it, or we're kind of doing it, but we're not doing it across the entire organization. This is where the the cybersecurity and privacy capability maturity model really is going to be really cool. Is that being able to ask those questions, how well you're doing this, but based on a maturity level, so it's not just yes or no, but it's like, we're doing it limited or enterprise wide, or, all the way up to, yes, we've got like machine learning and AI driven processes. So that actually should really help normalize questionnaires that are, it might take a couple of years, but we really feel that the SCF is going to have a big play in cybersecurity insurance questionnaires.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard recently people on their renewals being quoted like absolutely outrageous sums of money, people talking about it. And I think it's all because, like, obviously the insurance firms didn't probably understand what they were asking. People have been hit, they've paid out a lot, and it's gone completely the other way now, which is like, it's over expensive and people are scared of not being honest. And then, like you say, these very black and white answers aren't really allowing the insurers to understand what they need to know.
Correct. Or even just the aspect of, the Mondelez case, I think it was against Zurich. I can't quite remember, but it was about the if it was a state-sponsored hacker or possible state-sponsored hacker, is that an act of war? And so those are really big big ticket discussions that really are going to affect cyber insurance as a whole.
So thank you, Tom. I really appreciate your time today. So I've got one final question.
Sure.
If we were to get another security leader or someone to interview, who would you find interesting to listen or us to talk to?
Good question. I'd have to think about that one. I can get back to you, but I mean, there are a lot of different people, that are good out there, but it depends on the on the industry you want to, specifically talk about. Especially on CMMC, someone like Ryan Bonner or Jacob Horn, great guests. So it really just comes down to the specific topic.
Okay, perfect. So, I mean, thank you for spending this time with us. Can you let our listeners know where they can hear from you? If you got any email addresses or LinkedIn's that you're happy for people to get in contact with?
Sure. I'm on LinkedIn, just Tom Cornelius, find under Compliance Forge or Secure Controls Framework. And you can just go to the websites. You can just contact support, or you can just email me at tcornelius@securecontrolsframework.com.
Thank you, Tom. Really appreciate your time today.
Cool. Have a great day.